went into $200,000 worth of debt to become an expert in that area. So it doesn't really matter, what we look like or what our background is. There's so much knowledge out there. We have experts, and sometimes you just need to be safe enough to have a very vulnerable conversation with an expert to be like, look, this is where I am. These are my goals. Like, I need you to dumb it down to help me get there.
Yeah. And I love that principle because, like you said, it's going to apply to just about any field where you're seeking advice, and making sure that you're seeking advice from someone that you feel comfortable with and that is truly an expert. It's like, show me before I ask you. Hello, Empower Nation. Welcome back to Empower Her Money podcast. I am your host, Angela Duncan, speaker, best-selling author, serial entrepreneur, and we talk all things money and business. Today's episode is sponsored by freemoneytipsbook.com. If you need help to get started on your financial journey, head over to freemoneytipsbook.com and download your free ebook. Today's episode, I am interviewing Dr. Amy Pearlman. She is a urologist, and she's going to tell you why you need to feel like the dumbest person in the room. Welcome, Dr. Amy, to Empower Her Money podcast. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yes, thanks for joining. I would love for you to start off and kind of tell a little bit about your story, your journey. How did you get started? And now you are a doctor.
I had a very vanilla upbringing and pathway through training. So I kind of checked all of those boxes that a lot of healthcare providers check off. I did my undergrad at the University of Miami and then went to Houston, Texas for medical school at Baylor College of Medicine. I did my 5 years of urology residency at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And then I did an additional year of specialty training in Winston-Salem, North Carolina at Wake Forest. And then I got my first big girl grown-up job actually in the Midwest, where I had zero ties. And I went to the state of Iowa to really start my career as a urologist. But I just decided 4.5 years in that I wanted a change. And what a beautiful world we live in today, where we can drastically change what we're doing in our day-to-day lives to just make a different type of impact. And so I left my very stable academic job, moved to the city beautiful Coral Gables area, and this is where I currently started my practice and as a urologist.
Awesome. So 2 things. One, for those that may not know what a urologist is, if you can explain that. And then 2, how did you pick that specific field?
Most people have never heard about a urologist unless you've had the privilege, or maybe not privilege, of having to see a urologist. And oftentimes for men, it's when they get their prostate exam, which is a rectal exam to feel the prostate. And in women, it might be related to urinary tract infection. So like in all of those examples, no one actually looks forward to seeing someone like me. But a urologist, some people think that they're doctors who specialize in men's health. And that's what I do in my day-to-day. But really, it has anything and everything to do with the urinary system and the genital system in people of all ages and all genders. So I'll give you some examples here. We tend to say that urology starts at the adrenal glands, or like these little organs that sit on top of the kidneys. And then you go all the way down, includes the kidneys and the tubes that drain the urine and the bladder and the urethral tube called the urethra in men and women. And then the external genitalia. So kind of, from the adrenals to out of the urethra. But I think of it actually as starting way above the adrenal glands, which probably sit like around right here. It really begins up in the brain, because so much of the signaling that controls how we pee and how we have sex is actually up in the brain. That's where it begins.
Very interesting. And what made you decide like this is going to be the field that you want to study?
Well, because at some point you have to decide, right? I mean, I think for a lot of us, there are so many different career paths that we would love to partake in, but like at some point we have to make a decision, and we have all these different crossroads. And so in medical school is 4 years. And after about a year and a half of classwork training, we just do a bunch of rotation. It's kind of like on the job learning. We see a lot of different conditions and go through a lot of different specialties. And Angela, I was deciding between three specialties. Any idea what they are? If you think about any type of specialty for the body.
So being a female, I would think, something to do with females or, I don't know, I'm fascinated by the head. So like eyes, ears, throat, like that kind of stuff is really interesting to me.
So actually none of those. And if you think, we all have, there are different areas of the body that we all think are fascinating and also other areas that we think are gross. So when I think of like ENT stuff and saliva, I'm like, ew, yucky, right? But whereas for most people with what I do, most people would say, oh my God, I can't believe you do that on a daily basis. So I was actually deciding between emergency medicine, so working in the ER, I was deciding between urology and pediatrics. And I liked emergency medicine because it was always so busy in the ER that I felt like I could actually contribute to the cause and play a role on the team. And I think for a lot of us, when we're so early on in our training, we're very impressionable. We just want to know that we're helping, that we're not getting in someone's way, you know? So I felt during my ER rotation that I could actually help. And then I liked pediatrics because I love children. And I liked urology for a couple of reasons. One was I've always enjoyed talking about sexual health, even like as a kid. I don't know why, but I just like doing that. And within urology, you can do it and it's kind of part of the gig. Also, I like the people that I was working with. And when we think about who do we want to surround ourselves by, right? I mean, each profession kind of has its stereotype of the typical people. And within urology, it tends to be a fun group of people. And the people that were training me, some of my mentors, one of them who I highly respected said to me one day, Amy, I think you'd be a really good urologist. And sometimes, Angela, that's all it takes is it could be one person that encourages us to go to take a certain path. But equally, it can be a single person that discourages us, right? So we can go both ways. And I look at that as actually a great opportunity because we don't have to be the best mentors in the world. We can still just do these like tiny little things to encourage people to go, in certain fields. And then lastly, the fourth reason I went into urology is they let me sew up a scrotum in the operating room. And I thought it was just the coolest thing.
That's funny. So in your work, you get to talk about butts and scrotums and penises, and it's just a normal everyday for you.
Yeah. But the interesting thing with urology is, there's female sexual medicine, there's pediatric urology. Now, over the course of my training, I did most of my training in like prostate cancer, bladder cancer, kidney stones, but I actually focus my career these days on men's health, helping with quality of life concerns affecting everyday men, which is really fun actually as a woman doing that.
Yeah. And I'd love to discuss that. So you left what some would consider a stable job, right? To leave that and to start your own practice. Talk about like what thoughts you went through to get to the point, and then what did you need to do in order to have your own place as well?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back even a little bit further to when I was in training, and we get our MD degree. So we're a medical doctor once we finish medical school. When I finished medical school, Angela, I had over $200,000 worth of debt. Wow. Even though I went to Baylor, which is one of the cheapest private medical schools in the country. I got a condo, so I had like in-state tuition for 2 years there. And yet I still finished off with so much debt.
Wow.
And so then, even though I was technically a doctor, and I think a lot of people think that doctors make a lot of money, I still had like 6 years of training before. I mean, I was making a salary, I was making like decent money, but I still had to start repaying my loans. And I'll tell you, residency has a lot of stress related to it. It's long hours, it's, a lot of responsibility. But one of the biggest stressors was my finances. And I felt like, Angela, that I had no one really to talk to about it. It was, even though in my line of work, I talk about sexual health, which is a very taboo topic, so are finances. And I
Yes.
didn't really want to sit down with anyone like to understand like, okay, so like how much money am I spending for my day to day? How much money am I spending to pay back my loans? And there was a time when I was like paying back my loans that I just meant to do like a one-time $2,000 loan repayment, but I set it up as a monthly like automatic payment. And
Yeah.
I drained my checking account. I maxed out my credit cards. That was one of like the lowest times in my life where I was literally like rationing out my food. And Angela, I didn't tell a single person. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone until I literally had no money, was like worried if I was going to be able to pay for gas. And I like reached out to my parents asking them for help, and like realized several months later, oh my God, I'm paying several $1,000s, more than I should on my loans.
Mm.
But it was so stressful. And I think that that's something like as we get more, more degrees and graduate degrees, it still adds up. It can be some of the most stressful stuff that we go through.
Right. And you don't want to start off your career feeling that like that stress. So yeah.
Yeah. And so when I started, my first job outside of training, one of the most meaningful things that I did was open up a savings account.
Mm. Mm.
Because I felt I could take a breath of relief, that I could start planning for the future and have a safety net.
Mm.
And that peace of mind is
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. That feeling, it's kind of like a little bit of freedom that you started to feel.
It is. It is. So I started investing and I started saving. And then when I decided to leave my very stable academic practice, then I started having to go into my savings account. But because I had started doing that early on, it
Right.
allowed me to take the biggest risk I've ever taken in my entire life, which was to move across country and start my own practice, knowing I was not going to make a salary for who knows how long.
Right.
But because I had investments and because I had money in my savings, that is the only way I was able to take that very big risk.
Yeah. So you were preparing for the jump to your own practice.
And not even knowing it though. Like my plans were never to actually start my own practice with my twin sister. My plans were never to come back to South Florida, but I was preparing for the future.
Yes.
And preparing for the future allowed me to do what I wanted when I wanted to do it.
Yeah. So then how did you teach yourself about investing, or did you ask advice? How did you start that part of your journey?
I actually met a gentleman when I was in North Carolina. I met him at the gym, and he was in a financial, consulting group, and he was starting his own practice. And I was one of his first clients, but we started off as friends and I trusted him. And now he's my, financial advisor. But it's really hard, really, with anything, whether it's healthcare or finances, whatever it is, to like find someone that you can have vulnerable conversations with. My conversations with my financial advisor are like, Chris, I don't understand a word you just said. Please dumb that down for me. So it's me saying like, I don't get it. That's not what I do day to day. I need you to like break it down into pieces and not feel like, oh my God, I'm going to be dumb if I ask this question. Because it's the same thing when I'm, in the healthcare setting, seeing a patient, right? I'm a woman in a men's health field. I talk about very common and basic men's health problems with grown men. And some people would say, like, how does that person not know this about their body? How is it that a woman knows more about the man's body than the man himself? Because there's no school for it.
Yes.
Because I went into $200,000 worth of debt to become an expert in that area. So it doesn't really matter, what we look like or what our background is. There's so much knowledge out there. We have experts, and sometimes you just need to be safe enough to have a very vulnerable conversation with an expert to be like, look, this is where I am. These are my goals. Like, I need you to dumb it down to help me get there.
Yeah. And I love that principle because, like you said, it's going to apply to just about any field where you're seeking advice, and making sure that you're seeking advice from someone that you feel comfortable with and that is truly an expert. It's like, show me before I ask you. So I like that too. And you found someone that you trust, you got to know them, and then you were in a situation where you can finally say, hey, I need some help. And can you bring that, for me, I've been studying money and finance for 20 years, so I can talk the language all day long. But sometimes I do have to reach that point where I'm like, okay, what questions do you have? And the person's just like, I have no idea what you said.
Because we never learned the language. So we don't even know the terms to use, and we don't know the questions to ask.
Right. Very true. So now that you have your practice in South Florida, what kind of growth do you see for yourself? Where do you want to go from where you're at now?
So I think the key to our success so far, so I started my practice with my twin sister around January of 2023. And I think the key to our early success was realizing we identified and defined, like, what are we good at? Where is our skill set? What are the tasks and jobs that we need to do? And if we can't do it or don't have the time or manpower or infrastructure to do it, how do we find the really good people to help us out, right? So we have a small team. We have like one employee and then my sister and myself. That's our team right now. But we've hired really good people. So we have someone managing our books and doing our accounting and helping with our HR and our bookkeeping and all that kind of stuff. So we just realized, like, we don't want to do that ourselves. Yes, we could as business owners, but we decided, nope, the money that we make, we're going to spend it on really good, talented people.
Yeah.
So I think that was really key. And then keeping our overhead very low, because it doesn't matter how much money a business makes. It's all about the overhead and what the profit is, right? And so, there are jobs that the two of us do now that we don't necessarily want to do long term, but they're jobs that right now we say we're going to do it. I get to be the director of HR. Yay. Like, great. I get to be director of HR. Right. But it needs to be done. And so I need to learn how to hire and how to let someone go if it's not working out. And so that's been more of the challenging part, is actually, Angela, not the healthcare side of it, not like the patient care. Like, we have that down pretty well. It's the business side of it. It's how do we manage employees? How do we manage a business? How do we know if we're doing well? How do we define success? Because that's very different as business owners.
Yes. And it's going to be different for each business owner. Your own success and what you think of success is different than what I think is a success, different than what your sister probably thinks is success as well. So growing the practice, do you see yourself expanding it, or what do you think is going to be in the future for you?
Yeah. So great question. And we've kind of gone, all in a few different places in terms of this response and where we see growth. What we realize now, initially we were like, we want to be in every state. We want to network with a lot of people and offer access to like everyone. And then we realized we don't really want to manage a lot of employees, because it's hard to find good talent, and just the added stress of hiring and managing people. My sister and I realized we don't really want to put our time and effort in that. We want to put our time and effort into providing really good care for patients. So right now we're developing like a flagship location for office in South Florida. And the way that we hope to expand and educate and provide access and really extensions of our expertise is not necessarily seeing patients one-on-one, but it's through going into the community and doing educational seminars. It's also having another arm for corporate partnerships. So that's where we see our expertise expanding, rather than in the clinic seeing patient, and being, several areas around the country.
Yeah, because like you said, there's a lack of education. So what better way to kind of combat or solve that problem is to get out into the community and educate. And then when people see you as the expert, and then when they need your services, they already know who to go to because they know you. And that comes back to being vulnerable with someone that you know, like, and trust, right? So that's incredible. I like that.
So the key thing there, Angela, is just like, when you say like, what's your growth strategy? I had to start with the foundation, because I was starting my practice from the foundation in South Florida, which is I need to build trust. And I need to know that people know that I'm reliable, and I can't take any of that for granted. And my reputation that I built in Iowa in terms of like trust building and being in the community, that didn't translate to South Florida. So I had to start from scratch there. So sometimes, the hardest part is just showing up, but I do that with intention, right? And building our reputation, which we start building our reputation really as kids. And so building that reputation is really key. And so even though a lot of the outreach stuff that my sister and I are doing now are not necessarily growing our patient base, they're helping us grow our brand in South Florida.
Right. And your database and your connections, because, you know, as you grow and get into new ventures, you might need an expert in a different field, and you've already been out in the community and you're making those connections now. So that's incredible. And I'm a huge networker as well. I love meeting people. I love hearing stories. That's why the podcast is existing. But yeah, so very similar, just educate, you know, if we take the time to educate other people and then we seek information, it just helps the community as a whole.
Yeah. And I love how we met, because we met at an angel investor event where I had no place being, right? And we sat next to each other, and it's like, but that's where the really fun connections happen, are when they're unexpected in a room of people from all different disciplines. The majority of people that I used to surround myself by prior to moving down here were all healthcare providers. I rarely hang out with healthcare providers down here. I hang out with people in biotech and finance, wealth management, all different industries. And I learn a lot. I learn a lot about customer service, which is everything.
Yeah, very true. So one last piece of advice for the audience: business, money, anything else that you could share that you've learned that the audience would benefit from?
I would say, well, a couple things. So one is, the hardest part is showing up. So just show up. Show up, shake some hands. You don't have to go to an event for a couple of hours, but showing face gets you noticed. The other thing is, I was talking to a medical student the other day, and she was in a room full of urologists, and she says, I'm the dumbest person in this room. To which I said, it means you're in the right room. So when I host some of the events that I do, I recently hosted an event for a bunch of biotech folks. And I told them, I said, when it comes to biotech, I'm the dumbest person in this room. So let's do a cheers, you know, for us learning and collaborating with each other, because it means we're surrounding ourselves with really smart people. And that's a beautiful room to be in.
Yeah.
And it's also a vulnerable place to be. But at the end of the day, no one really cares, right? And then the last thing is, think about what reputation you want to build, and make sure you live up to it, right? So like, our reputation starts when we're, you know, very young, and our reputation is everything. Our brand is everything. And the beautiful thing about that is that we have complete control over. And it really just has to do right with the basics of like developing meaningful connections, showing up when we say we're going to show up, and making sure that when we say we're going to follow up with someone, we do. It's so simple, right? I mean, what are your suggestions when it comes to networking and advice?
Yeah, so those are probably some key things. Showing up on time for me is huge, because when I'm on time, I'm telling you that I respect your time. I feel like when people say, oh, it doesn't start till I get there, or I'm sorry, I'm late, it's like you knew you were coming. Sometimes in Miami, you know, it's traffic, I get that, but not being intentionally, I'm always early because of that reason. Like, I want you to know that I respect you. And if this is how we're starting our relationship, that's important to me. But yeah, the reputation is big, you know, do what you say what you do, and just be authentic, be who you are. You don't need to apologize for that. Just be who you are. And if you have good intentions, it's going to show, and your business is going to grow, and your connections will grow. And again, it's just, I want to be the positive light to the community and be able to give back. And that's what I would love to be known for as well.
I love
Good.
it.
All right. So I'm going to pivot. I've got a fun question for you. If you could pick a superpower, what would it be and why?
My superpower would be that I wouldn't be able to talk. And I know that sounds a little bit strange, but being a good listener, like when I sit down with someone and I'm passionate about what they're saying and what our conversation is, I tend to interrupt them, because I just like, there's so much that I want to connect about, but also people want to talk. People want to share their story. And oftentimes if we allow them to share their story and we actually don't open up our mouths, we seem like the smartest, most incredible people, right? Because all they wanted to do was share their story. And so it would actually be to become a better listener and to talk less.
I like that. I haven't heard that one yet, but I can definitely, you threw me off at the beginning. I was thinking no talking, then we wouldn't have a podcast. I can imagine doing a podcast with like body language. I don't know. It'd be funny. All right, Dr. Amy, so if our audience wants to get in touch with you, how do they reach you?
So you can find me on Instagram, Amy Perlman, MD, and that's the easiest way. And then for my company, it's called Prime Institute, and our website is primeinstitute.us.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today.
Angela, thank you so much for having me.
That wraps up another episode of Empower Her Money podcast. I'm your host, Angela Duncan. If you're thinking about starting a practice, or if you're in medical school, have questions about networking, definitely reach out to Dr. Amy. She is quite the inspiration. I loved today's podcast. And again, I appreciate you coming on today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Empower Her Money podcast. Make sure you leave me a 5-star review, share this podcast, subscribe, and share the message.